Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Preston, we'll start recording. Feel free to. So, hello. This is National MS Office Hours. Today is the 12th of December, and Micah Linehan will be speaking for the next 30 or 35 minutes or so on a couple of things around cloud app security, ransomware, and other assorted things as he sees fit. So, Micah, we'll give it over to you, and thanks again for participating today.
So this would be the bearded Micah.
It's there's a picture out there in the wild, I think, of me actually having a beard or not having a beard. But yes, I've almost always had a beard. So yes, the bearded Micah. So I'm going to start with just a common scenario here, and we'll show you what this looks like. As we talk about ransomware, I plug in my USB. I open my folder to view the files. I decide to look at marketing strategies because I'm so very concerned about that. And oh no, all my files were encrypted, right? So stop me if you've seen this one before, right? So obviously we have the built-in controls and protections. Hopefully you've seen a lot of that last week. And you'll continue to see more of that as we have the protections built in around OneDrive and being able to do the restore. Going in and doing end user restore based on the amount of items that are essentially modified at that time, right? And this is built in natively on the SharePoint and OneDrive side. Really cool stuff just because we do document versioning based upon that. It's really easy for us to just roll everything out now with things like known folder redirection and everything else like that. You'll get that capability as well across, those documents, downloads, pictures, music, whatever. So I just wanted to kind of show that scenario, have everybody kind of look at that. And the next control that we have is looking at what does that look like in the cloud? What does that look like from a cloud connectivity standpoint? And to kind of reframe the context of this meeting, I know that a lot of the features here were set and, contextually from an A3 standpoint, we were looking at that from a cloud app security. Well, Office 365 Cloud App Security that's actually included with A3 does not include file protection or file activity reporting. Essentially, if you go into the Office 365 Cloud App Security, the whole tab here from an investigate for files just really doesn't show up. So as we look at that, and I can actually even go, I should be able to hop over here and pull up the documentation just so everybody can see this. Protecting it from ransomware. All right. So as we actually look at this in the behavioral side, the malware detection, and this is one of the reasons why we need A5. Number one, A5 has the capability to go in and add Box, Dropbox, and G Suite, and then we'll use that same threat controls and API level access to protect those other components from a malware detection standpoint. But from an Office 365 standpoint, we use Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection within the platform to protect OneDrive and SharePoint, which is another actual SKU as far as the A5. So I'm not just saying, hey, by the way, if you want to protect Office 365 from ransomware, go buy, just buy the A5 suite. For the malware detection controls that we have here for that 0-day protection, because we have the signature-based control set at that A3 level, you're looking at not just Microsoft Cloud App Security, but another great and valid use case for the integration of products across our security stack. So I will caveat this with I'm not allowed to install or execute or even build a malicious payload or package knowingly to my Microsoft controlled computer, and as such I cannot show you what ransomware and restore looks like in a live demo standpoint. So we can do the sad trombone and make it kind of a little bit of a bummer there, but that being said, we can still walk through what some of those configurations are, and I wanted to show you a couple of things around file protection, and I'm going to actually kind of probably end on conditional access, as we were kind of talking about that in the Q&A side. Preston and I were talking about that before the call, and he had said, oh, hey, so there's, I got stumped on a question earlier in the week on, how do I block external or guest access users from downloading items from Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive? And I go, oh, that's really easy. You just do it right in conditional access. It's just here, here, and here. And he goes, you answered that and you know exactly how to do it. And I'm like, yep, takes about 5 minutes. And we can actually do session control and block external and guest accounts from being able to download and exfiltrate data. So as a part of ransomware, malicious activity, malicious intent, we'll show you what that looks like as well. But for now, let's pull over here and actually look at our Cloud App Security and our dashboard here. And the first thing that I want to do is, we have the protections here. We have the ransomware capabilities. Ultimately, we have a policy in here, and I just enabled mine, but this malware detection control actually needs to be enabled. So it was disabled. I clicked the enable button. Now I can click the disable. But let's go ahead and look at this policy and see what we actually have. So we have some pretty cool controls. Again, this is where we need the Office 365 ATP for this component right here, right? The threat intelligence here is basically the information security graph, that signature threat intelligence controls. But the file sandboxing is a really cool integration. That's our detonation chamber for Office 365 ATP, meaning that if it's a unique MD5 hash or unique signature hash for a file that we haven't seen before that hasn't been detonated, we will sandbox that, we will detonate that. And so we can do that not only in our connections and our control sets, but we can go ahead and do that into third-party applications, right? G Suite, Box, Dropbox, those other ones that we were talking about. And so what actually I get a lot is, how do I connect these apps? And I can go back here, I can go into connected apps, and I can actually hit here and add it in. And so what I'm going to do is actually show you how easy it is to do Box, and hopefully I can remember my password. So we'll go ahead and show you what this looks like. So connect as an administrator. This is an OAuth connection. We strongly recommend that you do not do it as a co-administrator. I've had organizations that have set this up as co-administrators, wonder why they're missing logs and information. That's just the way that Box operates. So you need to do the initial OAuth connection and connectivity as that Box full admin, so that you can view all the telemetry, all the information, all the alerting. So if we click here, I'm going to go ahead and sign in. First try. Remember my password. Awesome. All right, so what I'm going to actually do is grant access to this at an OAuth level. Admin can make calls on behalf of users. We're going to manage properties, manage groups, manage app users, manage users. So we're going to grant access to Box. And now we've actually added that in. So what that is going to do is it's going to start actually scanning users' data and activities. Look at that, it's starting. So it'll actually go in. There actually shouldn't be anything in there because I don't use Box. I've just got the demo tenant for this level of integration. Maybe in a future office hours, I'll show you what the CASB side looks like from a download and accessing and reviewing content and data in Box. Wouldn't that be kind of cool for a follow-up? So from that standpoint, it's actually going to do its scan here, looks at users that are in there. It's going to look at all the files and content and everything else. And we can actually go ahead now and in our file investigations, if I want to, go ahead and leverage that as soon as it's done, integrating in our file lookups. And we can look at content that's there. We can actually look at external access information, internal access, private access. One of the really powerful tools that we have here on Microsoft Cloud App Security from this side is actually not just the capability to do the integration here and say, hey, I can look at all this activity, right? Let's look at the activity logs, see all of the users. And look at that. You can see all of the application usage and my configuration of actually consuming that OAuth token as well as logins. But I can change the behavior based on file policies of things being changed, not only in Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, those controls, but impact G Suite. G Suite is that exact same process from a connected app standpoint. I think that took 3 minutes as a part of this demonstration. We can do the same on that level. But I can now start looking at content that's shared externally. And as we look at this, I can see, oh, look, I've got my all files folder. We've got external collaborators. Really cool. Let's actually start looking at content, by file type, or let's actually look at files containing PCI information that are external or public internet, or just all files altogether. The important thing here is we actually can go then in and look at malware detections. Like I said before, it's a pretty good engine, but also I can't actually deploy malicious payloads into my workstation as well as into some of the cloud services that we have, just as part of me being a Microsoft employee. They really don't like that because I'm not on the CDOC team, so I don't get to do the fun malicious activities for testing. The one thing that this integration also actually adds in is our Azure information protection. So as we start talking about document protection, security, access, and that file and malicious intent and activity, we can leverage and actually consume all of the policies here that are in AIP. And this is important as we talk about unified labeling, unified protections, the sensitive information type classification that extends across all of Office 365. Microsoft Cloud App Security now adds that same unified classification, unified labeling into Box, G Suite, Dropbox, those controls and those containers, right? So we can go ahead, we can classify that information. This will actually run against new files and information, just like the malware engine running, right? Making sure there's no malware against those files. We can also make sure that the PHI or PCI or PII that's there, that's secured, can become a part of that as well. So if we need to classify information, or hey, we have a HIPAA container sitting within Box, you're supposed to be storing PHI in that container, I can do a search here and look for stuff that actually should contain PII or PHI. And now I'm going to go ahead and say, let's go ahead, and if it's not actually in that container, I can go ahead and actually start remediating it, right? So if we look at this international marketing strategy doc, wow, look at that. That may actually have that payload. That's the same doc, interestingly enough, from that other demo that I had done the click through for. But if I want to, I can actually go ahead and make this private again. I can inherit parent permissions. So as we look at content and classifications, this is a really powerful tool. And so if I want to remove a collaborator from here, it's actually going to pull the content and the ACLs for this content that's here, whether it's in Box, whether it's in OneDrive, whether it's in SharePoint, whether it's in Teams, and I can start doing remediation. So super powerful, right? So we start looking at document classification, content classification, understanding data as it's traversing in its life cycle, not just an identity life cycle, but life cycle of a document or other controls. We can curb and set compliances and set boundaries. The cool thing here is, in addition to it being unified and everything else, if I actually choose to do encryption with Azure Information Protection, I actually have to go into the settings here and look at the system settings. I have to go in and look at the information protection. I actually have to allow it, and I've already clicked it, but you have to activate the security key for Cloud App Security and Azure Information Protection. So by default, that isn't enabled, but what that does is it allows it to consume the root encryption certificate so that it can decrypt an encrypted file and scan it for content and maybe change the classification, add additional classification, add additional rules to it. So a little kind of hidden thing of, well, how do I do that? I can't get it so it can actually view anything that's encrypted with Azure Information Protection. There's a little checkbox here in the actual configuration and settings. So really powerful, really cool controls there. Kind of gets a little bit away from the security side from a ransomware standpoint, but security nonetheless, right? Something that we really need to start looking at. And we have institutions that have connected this up, done discovery against Box, find like 3,500 files. they start actually looking through and reviewing a lot of it. You filter out that container that you have from a HIPAA standpoint, and now all of a sudden you've got a list of maybe 50 or 75 files that actually contain PHI. Well, now let's start looking at it and who's accessing it, what it is. I can actually move that file. I can manipulate that. I could apply encryption if I want to. And so you start really securing your data and ultimately understanding and having a really good baseline for where your data is and what data you have. And I think that's one of the really cool components that we have on the Microsoft Cloud App Security side. So with that, we have some really cool capabilities, and we'll transition over into session control. And so this was actually the one that I was doing as I was showing Preston on how easy this is. You know, as always, we have our baseline policies here. I'm going to create a new one, and to the point of block guest downloads, that's exactly what we're going to do here. We have it in preview today. Select users, all users and all guest and external users, right? Exactly what we want. I don't want my data and my institutional data leaving my organization, so we're going to set that. And I didn't put a period in the name this time, which, as we found out, a period in the name for conditional access policy will cause the policy to break. So I'm going to select some applications here, and the ones that we specifically are concerned around are the apps that have our data sitting in it: SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive. So we'll select those two applications to start. And, you know, to the previous conversation and kind of the Q&A around, you know, yes, new applications, new products continue to roll out. We need to continue to protect those as they are. Interestingly enough, a lot of them sit within the SharePoint and the Exchange platforms. And so when we start affecting these policies and using conditional access policies, you know, Teams and the underlying document repository that's there, Planner, Delve, My Analytics, and OneDrive, right, can be affected from a conditional access standpoint with these Exchange and SharePoint policies. So really cool control here. I'm not even going to set any conditions to it. I just want it to be whenever somebody that's an external user is essentially accessing SharePoint, OneDrive, or Teams, we are going to go ahead and create a session control. And so now I'm going to use a conditional app control, and instead of going through the MCAS side and actually doing a custom policy and creating all these additional rules, which I can certainly do, we have a baseline for block downloads. And so if I click here, this can only, you know, works instantly for featured apps and can be self-onboarded for any app. You know, really what I want to do here is just use the default, you know, block downloads. So now any external user, as I turn this on, external or guest account, goes ahead and has access into an internal resource. They can view it, they can edit it, but more importantly than any of that, they can't download it or pull it out of my organization. And just like that, I'm actually going to create this one, and I'm going to actually apply this one because I think this is a pretty cool one to do. So you don't see me do that too often where I actually turn on and enforce one in a demo, but as I have gotten to use this well enough, I know that I'm not a guest or external user. So very cool controls, very cool conditions from that standpoint of if they're actually accessing any content or data, external user, you know what, they're not able to download anything, which means now I've protected that and created it so there is no conditional access control from that side, right? They can't exfiltrate data out of that organization, or out of my organization, rather. So really cool policy, really simple to actually enforce. I know we talk about it a lot, but you know, to what Preston and I were kind of talking about earlier today, I don't think anybody's actually demoed or shown that I've seen, but it's still a really powerful policy. Yes, both of those are in preview, but we've had some good success with it and seen, you know, obviously that it's going to continue to become a feature and build out from that standpoint. And so with that, those were kind of my 21 minutes worth of demo, or 20 minutes worth of demo around ransomware in the cloud. One of the most important things, and we can certainly link this document over, and I know it's a part of it, but really the protection, there's not a lot to configure. We just need to enable the policy, and that ransomware and that malware detection control is extremely powerful. The other thing that I've demoed in previous ones, and let me know if you want to see it, is actually going ahead and saying, hey, if it's classified with this and it gets shared outside the organization, revoke the sharing links. That's a part of the MCAS file policies as well. And so with that, we'll kind of move over to the Q&A portion of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. I put a link to the document on deploying conditional access app control for featured apps, that kind of stuff that's in there. And then I will also add the link to the document that you were just showing on cloud app security and ransomware as well. So I'll have that in just a second up there. And I will put those both into the Teams channel in just a moment as well for anybody who was about to ask that question. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions immediately, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can ask the question. We can continue to let people ask questions after the recording stops. So thank you, Micah.
It's my pleasure.